Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Corey, better known as the Seaman, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the Seaman's Cinema Sitdown. We just wrapped up talking about Jurassic World Camp Cretaceous over on Netflix. Season 2 is out now, and Seaman thoroughly enjoyed it. If you want all my thoughts, you can check it out right up there. But now, it's time to shift gears into a movie on Netflix the Seaman really dug so much that he recommended it to his parents before he even watched it, just off the trailer alone, mainly because period piece, 2 lead actors, totally had me sold on the story just from that alone. And as if they wanted to beat me to watching the movie, they put it on the night I recommended it without having watched it myself. So this is a movie I'm going to check out, and then I checked it out a couple days later. I was very happy when they reported back that they enjoyed it, and I was even more happy that after watching it, I also enjoyed it. What are we talking about? Despite some really bad pun hints that I may or may not have given you. If you picked up on it, you maybe know what we're talking about. You probably know what we're talking about because it's in the title. So why don't you pull up a chair, take a seat. We are getting ready to dive in, spoiler free, into Netflix's The Dig. And like I said, I enjoyed this movie. I figured I was probably going to enjoy this movie because it's a period piece. I love period pieces. This one's set in 1938. Out in Sutton, England, and it features 2 actors that I adore. Ralph Fiennes is our lead, Basil Brown, our digger. He's an excavationist from back in the 20s and 30s, and was an excavationist who was involved in digs that were pretty important, but very often was not credited with any of that. This is a historical fiction piece, but pretty much everything around Basil and his co-lead, Miss Pretty, played by the one and only Carey Mulligan. That was what really sold me, man. When I saw Carey Mulligan pop up in the trailer, I was like, oh, I love Carey Mulligan. And after watching her in Promising Young Woman, which was like something I'd never seen her do, this is a movie that felt more in the zone of things that I had seen, but also something I had never seen her do. Oh, I was so excited. I was like, oh, she's got to be playing like a wealthy mom in 1930s England. I'm so here for that. Let's check it out. And those were the things that pulled me into this movie. And I gotta say, paid off. It is a really interesting piece of history. The story around the Sutton Who excavation is fascinating. How they dug, like we're in the 30s, so like how they go about digging the hole to get to it. And as you can see, Basil Brown in that process right here. And basically what the story is about is Miss Pretty, played by Carey Mulligan. Her and her husband had bought this piece of land because of these giant mounds that are on the property, thinking that most likely there might be buried treasure. There were a lot of rumors and legends around these hills, and no one had ever dug in, mostly because things that they had seen. What's really cool is they give you a lot of info on like what it was like to excavate back then, how you go about something like this. Basil Brown notices like, sunken in spots, and he's like, oh, raiders probably came in here and already looted like all the treasure or whatever. And what's cool is Miss Pretty, she hopes that there's treasure, but that's not what she's here for. She's more about the history and finding it and preserving it. And that whole story is fascinating. Everything around this dig, who gets brought in, how like there's political elements to it. It's really fascinating, and the story of Basil Brown even more so, and how things play out with him is really quite interesting. And the relationship that he has to Miss Pretty and her son Robert, who's played by Archie Barnes, is just beautiful to watch on screen. It's so simple, and their relationship is so honest with one another. It's one of these things where Miss Pretty is kind of like a wealthy noble, to a degree, and Basil Brown is a guy who digs in the dirt, and like there's a period of time where like Basil can't come into the house unless certain things are going on, and like Miss Pretty is okay with it, and the people who work in the house kind of give him a tough time, and that kind of slowly melts away as he becomes more of almost like a family member to Miss Pretty. And the thing that's really interesting about Miss Pretty's story is, you're basically in a single mom situation because of something that happened with her husband, and the war that was certainly looming. And with all that going on, she also has a heart condition, so her health is not great. So watching Carey Mulligan navigate this really interesting historical stuff with the dig, and then navigating this personal story and struggle that she's going through, along with just all the things that weigh on her having to be the sole caretaker of her son, and how do you get to a place where you can get everything where it needs to be just in case things don't quite work out. And it's heartbreaking and beautiful to watch. And as I said, Archie Barnes, who plays her son Robert, his relationship with Carey Mulligan and Ralph Fiennes specifically on screen are just touching and heartbreaking in so many different ways. I mean, here's this young boy, and he kind of understands some of the things that he has to do. A lot of times, specifically back then, if your father was going away to war or some common phrase you would hear is like, you're the man of the house now. You got to take care of and look out for your mom. So that dynamic in the story is really, really interesting. And then not having that father figure, and kind of developing a relationship with Basil Brown, you kind of get this father figure feel with both Robert and Miss Pretty, kind of like father, grandfather. And as we learn more about Basil and his wife, which is a story that I like as well, but they don't have any kids. So to kind of watch Basil almost inherit like a daughter and a grandkid to a degree, even if just metaphorically, it's just this really beautiful story, and it's told really, really well. Writer here is Moira Buffini, who adapts this off of a novel, a historical fiction piece written by John Preston. And from what I understand, she adapts the book pretty spot on. So much so that there's an element of the book that ends up, that's the fictional element of the book, that ends up in the movie that we'll talk about in a moment. But Simon Stone, who directs here, not familiar with anything he's done in the past, but man, does he shoot a freaking gorgeous movie. Whether it's just the hills, even with the clouds that England is going to provide you as a backdrop. He just paints really beautiful pictures, whether it's raining and kind of gloomy, or if you get some of these wonderful sunset or sunrises that we see, and it just beautifully shot, pretty well paced. Also kind of ties into something that I didn't like about the movie, but for the most part, the movie is pretty well paced. Like the usage of the type of score they go with, it just kind of underscores the whole movie perfectly. But like I said, this movie is historical fiction, and why most of the historically accurate stuff centers around Basil Brown and Miss Pretty, and the dig, which like I said is fascinating. The stuff around the dig and what they find and what that meant to history and how that plays out. All really, really interesting stuff. However, there is an element where a larger crew has to come in, because Brown isn't going to be able to do it all on his own, and there's like some potentially very delicate stuff here that you obviously want to preserve for historical reasons. And back then, which is one of the other things that I thought was interesting, is you have a pair of museums like battling each other for things in England, and like it goes all the way up to the Queen to decide like who is going to be in charge of this historical stuff based on what it is. And what's really cool is like she kind of has a decision, and ultimately because Miss Pretty owns the land, it falls on her. So all that stuff plays out is really cool. But when you bring in this extra excavation crew, we get this secondary storyline that kind of comes in late in the second act, and it involves one of the excavators, played by Lily James. And all the excavators are historically accurate as well. And what happens with James's story is also accurate. However, there is another character that mixes into that story and the overall story, Miss Pretty's cousin, who is fictional. And what goes on with Miss Pretty's cousin and how he plays into the excavation people and that storyline that kind of shows up late in the movie. Just didn't want it. Didn't need it. Like I said, it's a pretty well-paced movie, but it comes in just over 2 hours. And it did start to feel a little lengthy when we're spending time with characters that show up late in the game. And I'm like, I don't really care about any of these characters. I care about these 3 people right here. And that mound of dirt. Like, that's what I really care about. And this extra storyline that they kind of... It feels forced, but was in the book and was adapted into the screenplay. just didn't work for me. And it has nothing to do with Lily James or any of the other actors. They all do fine jobs, but let's just say that there's a moment I wanted to live in for hours. It was so freaking beautiful. I mean, this is a movie that will bring you to tears if you are a crier like myself. And I was starting to roll some tears in this really, really kind of beautiful moment, kind of like a family moment with Miss Pretty, her son, and Basil. And then while you're living in that moment and loving every second of it, it's like, let's jump over here and see what's going on with these people. And you're like, I don't want to be over here with these people. I want to go live in this really important moment and not be over here. And every time we go over there, it does feel like a distraction. It feels like it pulls you away from the stuff that you're really invested in the movie. And it's the one thing in the movie that is historical fiction. And I just sit there going, hey, maybe it worked in the book, but for a screenplay, for a movie, and for a movie that's going to be slow, it's not like there's action, in this movie. You got a period piece that, it moves well, but it's going to be slower paced than something that's, as fast as an action movie. Why bring in more story to make that movie even longer when you can keep it like 90 to 100 minutes tight without that stuff? So for me, that's where the movie kind of falters a little bit. But if you can get past that, like I said, the story of Basil Brown and Miss Pretty and the Sutton Hoo excavation is just fascinating. From, like I said, the politics to how they dig. Basil is from Sutton. He knows that dirt so well, man. And they go into knowing the dirt and the different kinds of dirt and how you dig and stuff. They kind of touch on that throughout the movie and how you would approach something like this in the 1930s. And all that stuff's fascinating. And if you want a good period historical piece, there's lots of it in here. And I promise you, it's a really, really cool story. You're just going to have to deal with the storyline. And I was like, I didn't need it. So there you go, man. Those are all my thoughts on The Dig. Pretty rock solid for me, especially if you're a fan of period pieces and historical period pieces. You can overlook the fictional stuff and the extra 15, 20 minutes that kind of adds to it. And that doesn't kill you. That's not a detriment. That's not like it's a deal breaker. I think you will highly enjoy The Dig. But the question is, do you think that? Have we enticed you to want to check out The Dig? If you haven't seen it. And if you have, what did you think? Did you like the movie? Did you think the movie could have just been better if it would have just focused on our main story and not brought in these other elements? Did you think that secondary story worked? Did you like it? Were you invested? Or did you feel like it was a distraction and detraction from the things that matter? Anything you're thinking about The Dig, good, bad, indifferent, goes down below in the comment section. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're new, you want to come hang out with the C-Man anytime we're talking about movies, TV, trailers. Heck, WandaVision is in just a few mere hours. If you want to be here for all that coverage and you haven't, you want to show a little love support, jump over there, man. Join C-Maniac Nation by hitting that subscribe button. Hit that little bell if you want those alerts. And if not, that's cool too. Just hope you come on back and interact with us some more. But until then, for the C-Man Cinema Sit Down, I've been the C-Man. I'm signing off. Peace. Well, that's all live and breathe. You still here? Check out a video like this one or this one. And hit the subscribe button so you can get alerts and check out everything the C-Man's got at the Cinema Sit Down.